Right now across our country, we are having, and in the Senate, we're having a long overdue, absolutely critical conversation about policing in America. I am very grateful over the last weeks to be in good faith conversations with colleagues of mine across the aisle about a larger bill to try to advance policing in America. But today we're here on a far more narrow topic. And the purpose of the hearing is to talk about changes we need to make when it comes to how we as an overall society are going to respond to people dealing with mental health crisis and those who are behaviorally have disabilities of behavioral health. By and large, we as a society have failed to provide these individuals with the support, services, compassion, and empathy they need to thrive in our communities and live full lives. We see our streets with people experiencing homelessness, our jails and prisons, and we see, unfortunately, short and tragic deaths of those who are struggling with mental health crises. I haven't met a warden when I go visit jails or police leaders who haven't spoke with compassion and empathy that they are not the ones that should be dealing with this. There should be a better way to help people live healthy lives. And so today we focus in on what is unfortunately too often our society's first real interaction with people with mental health, and it often goes wrong. We're here to talk about how our great police officers try to deal with this issue. It's about how we have made police officers first responders for mental illness, intellectual developmental disabilities, substance abuse, and people experiencing homelessness. It is about how officers are deeply frustrated and, as is often the case, overwhelmed because they are expected to play the role of social worker, mental health expert, and medical expert when they do not have the training or the skills often to do so. And it's about how, for this reason, these encounters can quickly escalate to violence or turn deadly. One study of shooting data for 2015 found that people with untreated mental illness were 16 times more likely to be killed during a police encounter. The names, many of which we know, of the people who've died because of their encounters: Danielle Prude, Deborah Danner, Marcus David Peters, and so many more. Often when these deaths occur, I reach out to the police officers I trust in the police department that I oversaw as a mayor. These are great, tough cops, courageous, fearless, in fact. And I ask them, should those people with mental illnesses have died in those interactions? And they all conclude with me very quickly that there should be a better way. We as a society together should be able to avoid these unnecessary deaths. Public health issues cannot be fixed with a law enforcement response. We must find a different way. What is needed for people who live with mental illness or addiction is help, services, treatment, access to medication, medical treatment, housing, peer support, and more. We know from our experiences of sound law enforcement officers, people on both sides of the aisle, that this should change in our society. We are better than this. I mentioned my time as mayor of Newark, and I have to say I was elected with a mandate to lower violent crime. My city was experiencing a surge in crime when I became mayor in 2006, so I spent hours and hours and hours riding along with police officers, often till 4 o'clock in the night. I wanted to know the challenges they faced. I wanted to learn their profession as best I could. I rode with them, and I got to know them. And again, I was humbled by their heroism and their service and their sacrifice. I got to know them and their families. I saw their professionalism. I saw how they were willing to take extraordinary risks, often putting themselves squarely into life-threatening situations to carry out their duties. Let me tell you right now, the job of being a police officer in America is extraordinarily difficult. But what made their work harder was having to answer calls for service that took them to the person in a mental distress and screaming in their home, to the teenager whose mother called 911 because he was erratic and she had no one else to call, to the person experiencing homeless, struggling with addiction, lying in the street. We were so frustrated, me and my police leadership, that the calls for service kept people chasing what we called the queue, chasing call after call, as opposed to doing the strategic work we needed to do to solve violent crimes. Unequipped and under-resourced, I saw my officers spend their nights chasing those calls when they could have been more strategically using our manpower as police. And those people who they responded to could have gotten better help that would have prevented them from having encounters with the police in the future. I want to note that I received several letters from law enforcement leaders that echoed my own experience across the country in advance of this hearing, asking, almost pleading for Congress to fix the problem. I'm going to submit those letters for the record, but I want to read just some of the words. Sheriff Jerry Clayton of Washtenaw County, Michigan, wrote, "I urge the subcommittee to support and fund additional community-based services for people with mental health and substance use challenges. Too often, people in need of treatment end up in our jails. This is not where they belong. Wherever possible, we should make efforts to find ways to provide community-based care without ever connecting with law enforcement." Chief Sean Barnes of Madison, Wisconsin wrote, in this era of police reform, we must all challenge our government to provide a better level of service to the community. We can no longer simply rely on police responses to mental wellness and must view this issue from a community health perspective. We have seen far too many times this negative results of police-only responses to mental health calls. No person deserves to be imprisoned or harmed by police simply because they have mental wellness challenges. Chief Rochelle Barkney of Charlottesville, Virginia wrote, "By simply calling 911, a caller unleashes the full power of a system in which few officers are equipped to navigate. The Senate Judiciary Committee has the opportunity to inform the development of a national framework for responding to individuals in crisis. Included in that framework must be a pathway toward decreasing the presence of law enforcement in the mental health response portfolio, and for the allocation of funding and resources which build capacity to support community-led continuum of care options which incorporate lived experiences and racial equity into the system." In the meeting with local police chiefs 2 weeks ago, my colleague, my friend, and my partner in a lot of work here in the Senate, Senator Cornyn, expressed support for specialized training and more social workers and mental health experts so that police can do their jobs and, quote, keep the bad guys at bay and protect the community. I believe we can find common ground here. I very purposely made this first hearing about something that I thought there was a wide common ground to do. There's so many issues that we as Democrats and Republicans do a good job of delineating our differences. This is something that should rise, I think, more grace from all of us. How can we come together, right and left, to try to find a way not to rehash our differences, but champion our shared interests and find common sense solutions? It's time that we go that extra step to end what for many families with someone that has a mental illness in them has been a constant nightmare, fears of what will happen to their family member. I am grateful to all the witnesses that are here. I hope today we can narrow in not on our differences, but to see if we can find some common ground. That's when we as a country move forward, is when we find ways to stand together and work together to the benefit of others. It is the calling of our country to lead with that kind of spirit. I look forward to hearing from everyone. I look forward to a constructive conversation. And with that, I am honored to pass it on to my ranking member and someone who I have a lot of respect for, Tom Cotton.
Thank you, Chairman Booker. Policing is on the minds of many Americans today. It's on their minds because of the relentless coverage of some high-profile situations. But unfortunately, that coverage often includes falsehoods, which can be incendiary and, if repeated often enough, can do significant damage or something that no mere retraction can correct. There's another reason that many Americans have policing on their minds today. Last year, our nation experienced the single largest increase in murders ever recorded, a shocking 25% surge nationwide. In big cities, it was even worse. Murders rose in Chicago by 65%, in New York City by 58%, and in Washington, D.C. by 40%. Major cities additionally suffered the largest rise in aggravated assaults in 3 decades. American families and communities also watched in horror as drug overdose deaths rose to the highest level ever in their tragic history of addiction. 88,000 Americans died in just the last 12 months alone from drug overdoses. And our country also experienced hundreds of violent riots last year that inflicted billions of dollars in damages and wounded more than 2,000 law enforcement officers. Policing is a dangerous and difficult profession. It often involves individuals, all of whom are imperfect, making split-second decisions with life and death consequences. The vast majority of law enforcement interactions involve no use of force. In fact, are cooperative and cordial between law enforcement and citizens. And the vast majority of law enforcement officers are good, brave, selfless individuals, putting their lives on the line every day to protect their communities. They face tight budgets, long hours, and sometimes public ridicule, all because they dedicate their lives to protecting others. Nonetheless, we of course have understandable concerns about how police interact with the public, including with poor communities, minority communities, and individuals with mental health challenges. Given the potential consequences if an interaction goes poorly, it is no surprise that Republicans and Democrats alike are interested in finding ways to improve policing and to improve public safety. But despite bipartisan interest in this issue, we have seen, on occasion, unfortunate partisan divides that have gotten sharper in recent years. There is perhaps no more visible example of this partisan divide than calls to defund the police. Activists and politicians can mean different things when they use that term. Some, including some lawmakers in Congress, have literally called for the abolition of all law enforcement, although many of these same lawmakers and advocates spend enormous sums of money on their own phalanx of private security bodyguards. Abolishing law enforcement is, of course, a foolish idea that no serious person would ever want to see enacted. Others say we shouldn't abolish law enforcement altogether, but that we should simply cut their budgets further and rely more on unarmed social workers or mental health workers to intervene in emergency situations. Now, of course, we need to involve mental health professionals anytime there's a crisis situation or a person can receive treatment from a mental health professional rather than be a subject of our criminal justice system. And we don't need to ask police officers to also function as psychiatrists, doctors, and educators, or to solve every social problem in our society. They are on our streets to enforce our laws and keep our communities safe. And I suspect that most police departments would be glad to have more and better partnerships with mental health providers, as Chairman Booker outlined in some of the letters he introduced. I expect we'll hear more about this in the hearing, and I welcome the opportunity to work with my colleagues in a bipartisan fashion to improve the availability of things like de-escalation training and training on how to recognize and respond to people facing mental health challenges, and to expand partnerships between law enforcement on the one hand and mental and behavioral health providers on the other hand. But the suggestion that mental health professionals can replace the police rather than supplement and support the police is misguided and dangerous. The simple truth is that when law enforcement stands down, when it responds less to what some people would call small or quality of life crimes, or when the police are defunded, all we get is more crime and more violence. So let's be clear, law enforcement is not the enemy, and we shouldn't try to reduce law enforcement either. Not only can the police prevent additional victims, they can also be the opportunity to connect offenders who suffer from mental illness and addiction with the professionals that can give them the care they need. Almost every day that a police officer puts on their uniform, they help someone on the worst day of that person's life. Our police see the most heart-wrenching tragedies, the most gruesome gore, the most pernicious evils in our society. They are constantly faced with the worst and are always asked to be at their best. As violent crime and lawlessness continues to increase, we need more police, more resources and better training, and yes, more and better partnerships between our police and our behavioral and mental health professionals.
Hey guys, did you know we have a podcast called WJ Live?
The Western Journal's mission is to equip readers with the truth, and that's the same mission we have on WJ Live.
You'll hear from writers, editors, and special guests on the most important topics of the day.
You can catch us Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Pacific, right here at youtube.com/WJ Live.
While you're there, help us out by subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss any future episodes. See you there.